It's Primus Tracks with Josh, Frankie, and Soya.
What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, Primates! Josh here. Today we're having a wide-ranging conversation with former Primus manager David Lefkowitz. This is part one of what will likely be a multi-episode recurring series with Old Smiley, since we only got to about 1990 in this sprawler of an episode. He knows everyone and everything about the Bay scene of the time and has one hell of a memory. So I'll call this David Lefkowitz's Masterclass, Part 1. Take notes, guys.
The Grapevine book was an interesting experience for me because I was already about, I don't know, what year was that written? Like
2014. Yeah, 2014, actually.
Okay, because I can remember where I was living when I did a lot of those interviews. And, it was probably like 11 or 12, something like that.
Right.
But, I mean, I'm fairly certain that I'm quoted more than Lur, or
So you're all over it, yeah.
Or Tim, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, after Les, I might be the most quoted person in that book.
I mean, you're the most important factor in it.
It's a different side. I mean, Soya was on the road. I wasn't really on the road. I wasn't even really in the studio. I mean, I'd show up in the studio a couple times. I'd show up on the road, for every tour a couple of times. Yeah. But it was a different side of things for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what's fascinating to me, because when I flip through all these album booklets, there are all these names that are essentially faceless because they're not in the band. And I always wanted to know about those names.
Sure.
That goes back to just being a kid and looking at album sleeves and just being enthralled by everything that goes into an album. And then just going, well, who's that guy? Who's David Lefkowitz? What's an A&R guy? Or what's who's this Tim Soya and all that? Like,
yeah,
he got to be in the studio.
Yeah, I did the same thing when I was a kid. The producers and the studio musicians on like a lot of stuff back in the day, and definitely that kind of served me well when I got into the business. Like I knew about some of the basic aspects of making records and marketing records, I guess.
You had an idea what was going on just based on what you were like obsessed with looking at.
Yeah, and that was one of the great things about my connection with the Primus guys and the Limbo Maniacs guys and lots of other bands too, was finding those mutual passions. Because if you're a musician, if you're really into a band, you're really into a band, like, whoever your main influences are and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like I was just saying, Barney Leeson, he like texts me every day. He's friends with Brain and those guys.
I made a comment on the Brain one of these about when we got the drum set, and Barney was the one that hooked up the North drums for Brain.
Yeah.
And I said like, yeah, we got the drums from Barney. And I was like, fucking Barney.
Yeah. I remember the fucking.
Well, he sent me this photo the other day with Brain and Chad Wackerman together.
Right.
And I just thought it was so funny because I'll never forget the very first conversation I ever had with Brain, because I was working for the manager of Big City, and he had the Looters and Freaky Executives, which was Jay's band.
Which was a big moment.
Yeah, and that was this whole world beat scene. And that's why I moved to San Francisco. Why I got into the music business was world beat music in San Francisco. I'd spent the summer out there. This manager asked me, which one of my bands do you want to like try to, focus your time on? And I was like, well, I guess Big City, they're kind of my favorite. And I hadn't even seen him with Brain. I had seen him a previous version. And so I show up at rehearsal. I'm just kind of sitting there like, I don't know these people. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I hear Brain just going off like he does,
Yeah.
Like, talking about Chad Wackerman playing with Frank Zappa. And I had seen Chad Wackerman with Alan Holdsworth doing a clinic, because I missed the show because we went to see Bowie.
Good Lord. Yeah. Don't say that word.
Wow. Yeah. I saw Bowie quite a few times, but this was in like 85, in North Carolina and Virginia. So I missed the Holdsworth show with Jeff Berlin and Chad Wackerman. And they did a clinic the next day. So we rushed back to see the clinic, whatever. So then I was able to talk to Brain about our mutual love for Chad. And, that was our connection originally.
Wow.
So.
That's outstanding. So that's fascinating that you spent some time in the Bay Area, and then it sounds like, and you were in college at the time, right? And you knew that's where you wanted to be and get into the music business. It wasn't some accident.
Well, so what happened was I was following this like science path in college. My dad's a scientist, basically.
Nobel Prize Peace winner.
Yeah. I noticed the Nobel Prize thing, and I was thinking, pressure.
Yeah.
Nobel Peace Prize? How do you say that? I'm a dork. Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Well, not Peace Prize is for like, Nelson Mandela and Obama.
I don't know. But he's a Nobel winner.
But you'd be surprised at how many people say Peace Prize, just because that's the way the words roll off your tongue. Right. But yeah, he won that in 2012 for chemistry. He's a doctor. He's an MD. He's not a PhD. He's a medical doctor, but he's always done research. And anyway, so yeah, he was at that level already when I was in college, even though he hadn't won that particular award yet. And I just was kind of stumbling in his footsteps, and
okay.
It seemed like laboratory work was sort of what I was heading towards doing the rest of my life. And it wasn't like I was excited about it. It just was sort of what I ruled everything else out. So as I was approaching kind of the summer before my senior year, my dad said, why don't you work in a lab this summer and make sure that you really love it, if that's what you're going to do the rest of your life.
Start at the bottom of the barrel and see if can you climb out of it?
Yeah. And he said basically he could get me an internship for the summer in a lab anywhere I wanted in the country. And growing up all over the East Coast, we'd moved around quite a bit. I grew up, mainly in North Carolina, but I hadn't really been to the West Coast at all. And so I just picked San Francisco because of, kind of my love for 60s rock music and stuff, and just seemed like, it seemed cooler than LA, obviously.
Good choice, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was working in a lab at UCSF, and I was picturing, college campus, sunny California.
Yeah.
In the summer. Well, it turns out there's no sun in San Francisco in the summer.
Correct.
It's totally fog bound.
Fog bound always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only is there no college campus at UCSF, but there's no undergraduate division of the university. It's an entirely graduate level medical campus. It's basically a hospital with labs. And that's it. There's no campus. There's no undergraduate lab. But it was in the inner Sunset, and I was like walking distance from the hate. And,
nice.
I definitely figured it out and was seeing.
Went to the I-beam at the night break one night.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was at the I-beam, and it was like Tuesdays or Wednesdays. They had these like college dance nights. You could get in free with like your college ID, and like, it was like early to mid 80s. And I started hitting on this girl. And she claimed that she was the girlfriend of this guy, David Morgan, who was a bass player in Santana, who was playing across the street that night at the Full Moon Saloon.
And played there, know it, love it.
Yeah, in a band called Pacific Brass and Electric. So we start talking, and so then whether she was his girlfriend or not, we wound up going out one night, and she's like, well, what do you want to do? And she starts telling me about these world beat bands. And I was like, what the hell is that? And, amongst my favorite artists at the time, besides King Crimson, were Peter Gabriel and Talking Heads, and
right
Gabriel and Talking Heads were, fully doing like African influence stuff and, whatever.
Right. And XTC at the time was as well, right?
Yeah. I love them too.
What's the XTC album that has Nearly Africa, the green?
Yeah, English Settlement, maybe.
English Settlement, yeah. It was right about that time too.
Yeah. And so we go to the Great American Music Hall, first time in my life, and we see Big City. And Brain's not in the band yet, and neither is P. It was a different lineup, but it was Joe Gore. Oh, I listened to the Joe Gore episode too, guys, by the way. So it was Joe Gore and his partner Robin, and one of my great friends, Bo Razone, who's actually the guy that nicknamed me Smiley, not less.
Oh, I was curious about that.
Yeah, as it turns out. Yeah.
Josh, Frankie, you guys getting that factoid right there?
Filing it away.
Because I was just so happy to be working with a band when I eventually hooked up with Big City a year later. But yeah, I was blown away by the music. And I think I got to see the Looters that summer.
Uh-huh.
I think I got to see the Freaky Executives. They might have played at the Hate Street Fair.
I never got to see the Looters. I saw Freakies once or twice, and that's it. It was kind of the end when Jay was moonlighting both Primus.
Yeah. So this was summer of 85. So then I went back to college, and my dad writes kind of an essay for some giant magazine. The name of the magazine was like Nature or like Nature Science magazine. Or something. Science, it was huge.
Science Pros only.
Those journals,
and like he's one of the most published, scientists of all time. And this essay was about success, like not about science, just about succeeding in life. So I'm starting my senior year in college, and I have this heart-to-heart with my dad one night, and he's like, if you don't love it, you're never going to be good at it.
Right.
The only way you're going to be successful is to figure out what you're most passionate about in life and figure out a way to make a career out of it. And so the light bulb just went on, went right on. And the fact was that not only did I realize the truth of what he was saying, but I realized that it was going to be okay with him if I didn't pursue science.
Absolutely.
That pressure weight of doing what your dad was accepting was gone.
Yeah. I was like able to, just do what I wanted to do. Wow. And it kind of helped that his best friend, who was the head of the entire Duke University Medical Center, his brother-in-law was one of the most successful rock managers of the 70s, this guy, David Krebs, who discovered Aerosmith with his partner and parlayed that into this career in the 70s where they had Ted Nugent, AC/DC, the Scorpions.
Wow. Right.
They had,
in the 70s, that's heavy.
They had Parliament Funkadelic for a minute around the Aqua Boogie phase. They created a Broadway show called Beatlemania.
Which was huge.
So I immediately decided that I was going to try to get into the music business, and I was going to see if this guy, David Krebs in New York, could help me out, because my dad's best friend was, kind of part of our family and really liked me a lot and wanted to help me out. So I had, 3 vacations that year in college, and every one I'd go to New York City and meet with this guy. And, he'd set me up with meetings at record companies and, give me ideas of ways to get into the music business. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, World Beat Music, San Francisco.
Yeah.
So then there was this magazine, I'm sure you guys know, it's defunct now, called Spin.
Spin magazine, yeah.
Well, the first issue of Spin ever came out in January of 86. So now I'm beginning my last semester of college, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get into the music business. I'm thinking I'll probably move to New York, to do that. My whole family's from New York. Mm-hmm. And the 3rd issue of Spin comes out, March 86. The cover story is Big Audio Dynamite, but on the cover, another one of the main stories is World Beat Music in San Francisco. I'm like, it's happening, I knew about this shit.
That's it. I'm going.
The whole idea that I knew about some music that I thought could be really popular, because, the whole idea about World Beat is that the communication between, countries and cultures was breaking down because of technology and the world. Everybody was influencing each other and sharing ideas and whatever. Michael Jackson had done the whole, Mama Say, Mama Sa, Mamako Sa thing, which was Nigerian and all this stuff. So it just seemed like this huge thing. So that, half the article was an interview with this guy, David Rubinson, in San Francisco. So I'm meeting with the Aerosmith guy in New York, and I'm telling him about this. And he's like, David Rubinson, that's my college buddy. We went to Columbia University together back in the 60s. Which ironically is where my dad went to. So he's like, why don't I just call Rubinson up? I'll tell him you'll move out to San Francisco and work for him for free.
Wow.
And that's what happened.
As a dad does to get a son out of the nest.
Yeah, that's what happened. So he called Rubinson up, and, I get out there, and Rubinson's like, so what can you do? And I'm like, I don't know. What can I do?
Got a microscope? I got some some lenses. What are they?
He was totally fucking with me, and he turned out to be kind of an asshole. He was a New York personality who moved to San Francisco in the 60s. He was an A&R guy for Columbia Records. He was the staff producer of Columbia Records, and the funny thing is, he could have signed any one of the 60s bands from San Francisco to Columbia. The Dead, Airplane, whoever.
Yeah.
He chose Moby Grape.
Ah.
And then they fucked it up because they were so cocky that this was like the American Rolling Stones or something, that they simultaneously released 5 singles to radio.
And then the big record, the dude had the flip off finger on the cover.
Yeah.
And it's just like, come on, what?
Yeah.
Try to fuck with your own game, dude. That's not the thing you want to do.
Yeah. But in the early 70s, he was partners with Bill Graham on a bunch of companies. So David was a huge record producer. He did like amazing albums. He managed Herbie Hancock for 15 years and produced, almost all his records during that time, and tons of R&B and like heavy jazz, and, had his own studio. It was literally the first automated recording studio in the country. It was called the Automat.
Wow.
And, but in the early 70s, Bill Graham, big concert promoter, obviously, like the main one in Northern California, one of the main ones of all time. David was the producer, but together they had an artist management company and 2 record companies. And the record companies were Fillmore Records and San Francisco Records. One went through Atlantic and one went through Columbia. And they could just sign whoever they wanted. It was this big deal. And they had big staff. And, I remember they had Tower of Power. And I don't know, David did some Santana records, and Bill was managing Santana. Anyway, so he was, really successful. And at the time that I was in the office, he had just lost Herbie Hancock after 15 years. And he was managing Wayne Shorter, though, who not only played with Miles, but, was the co-founder of Weather Report.
Right.
And, but he was also managing Nard and Michael Walden, who started out as a fusion drummer with Mahavishnu Orchestra, Jeff Beck, songwriter too. And then in the mid 80s, Nard became one of the hottest producers of pop music in the country. And then during this 2-year period that I was in David's office in 1987, Narda won the Grammy for Producer of the Year for producing the first 2 Whitney Houston records. I mean, Whitney Houston was not known until he started working with her. And then he did the Aretha Franklin comeback record. So that was going on in the office. But then there was the World Beat stuff.
How did you fit in at that moment?
Young guy.
It was weird. I was this young kid in the office, but I had, this, it was a small, it was like just a couple of floors, like of a Victorian in the Haight, off the panhandle of the Haight. But, he was like a legend in town. So like I kind of started in that little nest or whatever. Yeah. So I could, fill out the form for BGP and like buy tickets to the sold out shows that the way you did it back then. And all my buddies were Deadheads. And so they were like, oh, you got to hook us up for Dead tickets. It's sold out. And stuff like that. So it was basically a great way to learn how to be a successful manager in San Francisco.
Well, so then for me, the most important thing now at this point in what you've told us is, how did you hook up with Les and become Primus's manager when they were just some band that didn't even have a couple demo tapes?
So what happened was, so the way I started to make a living was that every band needed to book shows, and they didn't want to deal with it themselves. And it turned out that most of the time, the managers on this local level, if they even had a manager, most of them didn't, the managers didn't want to book the shows either. So it started with
they weren't allowed to. It's against the law.
Right, supposedly, yeah. It's against the state law.
Supposedly, the manager can't be the booking agent.
Yeah.
Oh,
so Joe Gore and Robin of Big City gave me this very extensive list that they'd created over a period of a couple of years of every little hole in the wall bar or club, from like Santa Cruz to Eureka to Nevada City, I just started calling them up, and I was just getting the weeklies and like looking at like street fairs and who books those and college, bookings. And next thing you know, I developed a booking agency roster. Like I became this local booking agent. And in San Francisco, let's say this is like 87, there were certain bands that could headline some of the best like small clubs, on like a monthly basis. And there, I guess you could call them alternative rock, and some of them were more straight ahead rock. I was representing like all of those local headliners. Mm-hmm. In that day, national acts that came through town at that level anyway didn't have an opening act on tour with them. So
Fishbone, Chili Peppers.
Yeah. So when it came to bands that we could relate to and love, like Fishbone and Chili Peppers, I could call up the Berkeley Square or the Stone or whatever and say, hey, I have, these bands, Primus and Limbo Maniacs. They're both worth like 100 people,
Yeah. They're worth about 2 at the time.
So if it might have been 25, but like if you pay them like $150, to open for Fishbone, you'll get at least 100, people to buy tickets.
And then Fishbone will have 100 people in the venue.
Exactly.
Because they drew 50 people.
So through that, Primus would get more fans, Limbo Maniacs too. Lots of other great situations. And there were some local managers that had some decent bands. And then there was a certain point where like, there was this one management company and I booked all their bands and like their bands started getting major label record deals. And then it was like, well, I can't book a national tour for these bands. So either I go to LA and join like William Morris Agency and become an agent full-time for the rest of my life.
Right.
Or I just let these bands go and keep doing what I'm doing. And that's what I did, because I was really already managing, Primus Limbo Maniac. So the way that happened was the great Chris Strauss-Cuevas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whose mom was technically Primus's first manager.
Right.
Cuevas, right?
Yeah, Kathy Cuevas. Chris was already like a legend in the Looters big city.
It was the Looters roadie at the time.
Yeah, but he had left and gone to New York following this woman who was a model. So he was gone. So I hadn't met him yet. So I just keep hearing about how great this guy is because I'm already hanging out with like Flapjacks is working for the Looters, and they had this Looters in big city. Like Robin was in big city with Joe. Her boyfriend was Matt Callahan of the Looters. They lived together. They were kind of the focus of this organization called Commotion.
Commotion, of course.
Like a political organization of these world beat bands. They had a rehearsal studio where there were a lot of bands rehearsed, and they would pay for the rent for the rehearsal studio by throwing a rent party once a month. Right. And at these parties, a band would play. So Primus played one time. That may have been the second time I ever saw Primus. And I'll never forget, how Les does the doodles on the set list. I'll never forget the little flyer that Les drew for that, where everybody called him Grandpa at the time.
He
just seemed like an
older than everybody.
Yeah, and he was like 6 months older than me. But so Chris comes back. He starts to manage Primus, and he knows that I've got this booking agency thing happening. So he asked me to start booking Primus. I'm like, great, I love Primus. I'd seen him. I feel like the first time I ever saw Primus was at this place called The Farm.
But I have a question about that, David.
Yeah.
You described your first experience with Primus as back in 1986, and you said that you witnessed Curveball with underwear on his head.
That's the show, yeah.
Michael Jackson's tunes on stage.
Totally. That was it.
Yeah. And what was your impression about Primus? I mean, with their original songs at the time and the sound that they had going on back in that year.
Like I said, I loved King Crimson, Talking Heads. I love the Chili Peppers and Fishbone too, which was some of the more new. I didn't like a lot of newish stuff, but that I definitely loved. I was getting more into, funk and everything. And so to me, Primus kind of sounded like, 80s King Crimson meets the Chili Peppers, which isn't very accurate description at all. But just the fact that I could really relate to their sound based on stuff that I loved, was all I needed. And of course, being a fan of a lot of fusion and prog rock and great players. And, I play guitar myself. I never was that good. I've always been able to appreciate musicianship, whether it was a drummer or, or a string player or whatever. And, I knew from the first song I saw Les play that he was an exceptional
right on.
I mean, obviously his skill ratcheted up a bit over those first few years, but he was already like doing something nobody else was doing right off the bat.
Yeah.
And Curve's playing, frankly, was kind of sloppy,
Simple.
Yeah. There was no fills. There was no real feel to the grooves. It was just kind of plodding, grooves. Mm-hmm. And Todd was just obviously very unique and complemented the whole thing.
Well, Dave, the first time I ever met you was at that show in Santa Rosa in, I'm going to say 1987, 88. It was No Means No, the Beatniks, Primus, and Victims Family at that warehouse. Do you remember?
You weren't in Victims Family yet.
No. I played cowbell in one of those songs that night. But after the show, you were interested in the tie-dye shirts that our friend Jenny had been doing for Victims Family.
Oh, wow.
She had befriended you, and she comes to me, she goes, "Oh, my God, I just met the manager for Primus. He's interested in me doing shirts for Primus." I was like, whoa, who is this dude? And I turned, she's like, "That dude." And you're like, "Hey," and you handed me your business card. It's all David Lefkowitz. Kooky.
Yeah. So I was kind of a copy of Rubinson's business card at the time because he had a company called Adam's Dad Management. His kid was named Adam, like a child's pencil kind of scrawl. So we found, my girlfriend was a graphic designer at the time, and she found a font. I forget. It might have actually been called San Francisco font. Every letter was like a different font.
Right. Well, if you remember, at that show that night was Curveball on drums, and and everybody in our circle in Santa Rosa at that time, Petaluma, Santa Rosa, was like, "Primus, who's this band?" Like a couple of people had seen Primus, and we were like, "Who? What? I don't know."
What's interesting about that is that is clearly before there was this so-called funk thrash scene.
Oh, wait, but dude, that was like 1987-ish.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I saw No Means No.
Right. I mean,
and the Beatniks.
Yeah, which Michael Franti was in, who I wound up managing briefly.
Incredible show that night, though. I remember seeing Les funking it up. We're like, "Whoa, okay, these guys are great," and wow, that guitar player is great, but man, that drummer is just like going.
Yeah. So I mean, keep in mind that I'm spending probably at least 5 hours a day on the phone at this desk they gave me at Rubinson's office.
Right.
Booking bands. And so if I managed the band too, then I was like, at least doubly as motivated, to help them out. So anybody that did shows that would give us a gig, I got to know. And that's how I got to meet Laurel Pine, who was this incredible young female promoter.
Oh, man.
From Sonoma County, where Tim's from. And she just used to do incredible shows where she'd put all these bands together. Incredible stuff. Right.
Dude, I worked for her for years for free. Dude, are you kidding?
Yeah. She was
the stage manager for all those shows, dude. And
she did incredible stuff. And, there was you just had to rent a venue for the night. And luckily there were places, that you could do that.
And then it's like Firehose, Mr. Bungle, Primus, and Victims Family.
Yeah.
So, David, I read that you used to create bills for these shows. And in order to get... to catch people's attention, you would label them funk trash festivals, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, jumping back just to tie up what you were asking before, Trows had me booking the band.
Right.
And that's when he descended into his Herald of the Rocks period.
Right. Right. These guys might not know about that, but I do. And you do.
That song is a true story.
Yep.
And, you can pinpoint Trows in that song because the original derivation of the name Trows was that he wore these like shorts that were kind of like army shorts with like crazy pockets. You could put all this crazy equipment into, and Les used to call them swamp trousers.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, and so he was called Swamper.
Yep.
Now Swamper and Greenie finally succumbed.
Right on.
And that was Trows. Yeah, and that was Trows.
And he became Trows to get away from the Swamper.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's have told that at some point, so I made that connection. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was descending kind of into this thing, and I think he stole some money from Commotion.
Oh man,
he stole money from a bunch of people at that point.
Yeah. So like one of his last lucid thoughts before he was just gone for a while was to say, "Hey Dave, can you just take over managing the band?"
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know that story. That's awesome. And that's where it started.
That's basically, that might be an embellished version, but like that's what happened,
Right.
So I mean, like, if he hadn't had a drug problem, I don't know where I'd be right now. But yeah, so Limbo Maniacs was like another full-time thing, and Brain and Pete Scaturo were both in Big City.
Yep.
Right.
And
with Joe Gore, right?
With Joe Gore and Robin and this guy Borazone, and they had a singer. Anyway, so Limbo Maniacs, like I related to those guys on a musical level in so many different ways, and the story is really that House, aka Butt House.
Yep. Old House. Yep.
Bass player and vocalist for Limbo Maniacs and I were talking, and I can't remember the exact timing of things because, as you may know from the book, I also wound up managing Blind Illusion
I didn't know that. You did that for a second?
When the Sane Asylum record came out, and it was on a good label too. It was it was through Combat in the US, which is part of Relativity. It was like the metal label Relativity.
Right. That's it was signed to Music was on. Right.
Yeah, it was Music for Nations was the label they were signed to in the UK, and that went through Combat in the US. So Les rejoins the band, and he asked me to manage Blind Illusion. Not that it was his decision, but he had convinced Biederman, since they didn't have a manager, Mark Biederman being the leader of Blind Illusion, to let me do it. Now, I've never really been like a metal fan, per se. But I mean, I can appreciate any kind of hard music as much as the next guy for the most part. And I think not only did this help me, but this really helped Primus, because I basically had to like take a crash course in metal management, to deal with the Blind Illusion thing. And so, I'm talking to Debbie Abono, who was like this legendary female manager in the Bay Area who had all these great bands. I think she managed Possessed, right?
Yep. Oh yeah. Yep.
Fleur was in, and all these metal label people. And I started kind of seeing like, well, how is this all working? And like, there's labels and distributors and publicists and, radio promotions. And I'm starting to kind of figure stuff out through this metal piece, and obviously like I'd get Primus on as an opening act for whoever, I remember there was a specific like 3-day period or something, or 4-day period where they opened for 3 totally disparate musical bands. And one was Testament.
Yeah.
One was, I think, Schoolie D.
Yeah, we did that Schoolie D at the I-Beam that one time.
Yeah. And then in that same 3-day period, there was another show with like just some other random thing. So that was kind of the cool thing about Primus. It's like they didn't sound like anybody. They didn't really fit into any, particular category, but they could kind of play with almost anybody. And,
they were bringing something that was so original.
Thrash metal was this huge thing from the Bay Area. And Blind Illusion was like kind of an odd band for that scene, but they were in that scene. They were like the Grateful Dead influenced thrash metal band, which was just like, doesn't make any sense, but that's what they were. Yeah. So, and it was this very like, I hate to use the word hot, but it was like this really active happening scene of thrash metal. And, tons of bands on labels and touring the world. And, Les grew up with Kirk Hammett, obviously, and he was in Metallica by that point. It was just like way beyond any level of success that we could imagine. But we were kind of had an inside, view of that. And, at a Primus show, you'd get metalheads and you'd get skateboarders and you get hippies. And even back then, but it took a while for that to really kind of pan out and really permeate all these different groups. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Primus and Limbo Maniacs were my 2 priorities. And slowly all these other bands started to come out. And I actually started to work. I had a band called the Smoking Section that I think Jay talked about a bunch.
Oh boy. Going for the gold on that one.
Yeah, they had a horn section called the Well Hung Horns. I think Jay designed a T-shirt or something. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about in that era. I don't know how deep to get into it, but basically all these punk funk bands, kind of in the wake of Chili Peppers and Fishbone. I used to really love this band from the Midwest called the Royal Crescent Mob, who put out this one record on an independent label. That's fantastic. And other stuff, little did I know at the time that in the early 80s in New York City, as part of the downtown Manhattan scene, there was this whole literally called punk funk scene with Defunct, which Tim and I have talked about a few times. So anyway, it clearly became a thing where if we put more of these bands together on a bill, we could play a bigger venue. I mean, you'd think that they would have the same fans, but no, because Fungo Mungo was from Fremont, and the Limbo Maniacs were from Cupertino, and Primus was from El Sobrani, and these are very far places from each other, Okay. Yeah. And it was such a bizarre thing because all these musicians that I became so close with, they all grew up like an hour away from San Francisco. And so their life, or from Berkeley, and their life was like driving an hour, to go see every show. And like I lived a block off Haight Street, and so everything was happening on Haight Street during those days too. Like all the main music clubs were there for the most part. Berkeley Square was a big part of it. So anyway, we were putting together like the first big show at the Omni, which held over 1,000 people. And we realized we could probably do a pretty big show with Primus, Limbo Maniacs, and, one or two openers. And it was a thing where I was talking to House on the phone, and, we were like, instead of calling it punk funk, we should call it, thrash funk. Right. And then we were like, well, should it be thrash funk or funk thrash?
Big difference.
You and House coined that term.
Yeah.
Funk
That's
metal.
Incredible because
Funk
I followed
thrash.
Primus for a
Thrash
long time.
funk.
Thrash funk. That permeated the Bay after a while. I understand. So that started with you talking with House on the phone, huh?
Yeah. I remember like Mike Patton calling me up from Eureka or Arcata or whatever they were from, and saying they wanted to open for Primus. So I was helping them out, not officially as an agent, I don't think. And I guess as it turns out that they kind of knew Faith No More from when Faith No More came up to Eureka and played. I didn't know that until actually pretty recently. But the bottom line is that when and I remember Primus opening, just to go down the Faith No More path for one second. I remember we did a very memorable event, was Primus opening for Faith No More in the pre-Patton days when I guess Chuck was the singer. This was in LA at a place called Al's Bar. And
oh my God, I played there with Victor's family. Holy shit.
Yeah. And Curveball was definitely in the band. And we had this van. Primus had this van. I don't know what you call those kind of cargo vans that had like the chain link kind of thing behind the driver.
No, that's just the
cage.
That's like a service van, so that they break into what's in the back. That's the one Les had when I started with you.
So we go to LA in that thing, and
you only see three people in the front, and you sat in the middle. You sat on a milk crate.
And the funny thing is, like when I started with Big City, like I was basically the roadie. Like that's all there was to do. And then like I really sucked at it, and like Pete Scaturo was operating a synclavier, which is one of the first computer music systems, and had all these cables, and like, so my job was to like plug in the cables, and I'm like, I fucked it up every time, So finally like, Dave, I got it, man. You're good. Go get me a beer.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
So that's how I became the booking agent for Big City, is they felt bad that like I sucked so bad as the roadie. They wanted me to like do something that maybe my college education would help me out with.
Right.
So, but for whatever reason, like I was on the road with Primus going to this Al's Bar show. And I think Curveball's dad lived in a suburb of LA. And so we were staying at his house. I don't think he was there. And Les talked about that woman, Julie, who lived down there as part of the Grapevine story, because I was in LA, and she was there that night in Flapjacks. And there was an earthquake, and we're all crashed out at Curveball's dad's house. And one really weird tidbit about that is there was a paperback book on the shelf at Curveball's dad's of an old 60s TV show. I'm pretty sure it was called Primus.
Really?
What?
Yeah, wasn't there like a show in the early to mid 60s called Primus that was about like a like a scuba diver kind of science guy.
Yes. Carter Primus. Yes.
No way.
Yeah. There were comic book
Frankie, you don't know about this, Mr.
No.
Factoid? Come on.
I've seen some of the comic book versions of it. Yes.
Frankie had some homework tonight.
I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. I might be.
Gosh, I'm amazed you knew that. That's crazy. I never heard of that.
I might be twisting that, but anyway. So that was just an interesting pre-patent Faith No More thing, and then we had a lot of stuff with Bungle. Then eventually Brain's cousin Kristen Yee, who was like his sister, really. Their moms were sisters,
and she started.
And they grew up in a duplex. So literally it was like their houses were attached. Mm-hmm. And Kristen worked at Different Fur, which was a recording studio where my office was eventually, starting in around after I left Rubinson, so like 88. I was in my bedroom, working out of my bedroom for a little over a year. And when we put out Suck on This, actually was during the time I was in the bedroom. So literally the first office of Prawn Song Records was my bedroom on Delmar Street.
Wow.
1 block off Haight.
Nice.
And I'll get to that. I'll get to that in 1 second. But I mean, the bottom line was just that we had this talk about the inside view of Metallica's success. I mean, obviously Metallica was far bigger than Faith No More ever got. But when Patton joined Faith No More and made that album, The Real Thing, Les and I got invited by Matt Wallace, the producer, who was like one of Weininger's mentors.
Yeah.
Wallace had actually done one of the early Primus demos, which was one
songs, right?
Called Primus Sucks, I believe.
Oh yeah. So I'm very curious about that, David.
Yeah.
I got a ton of questions about that. So I was wondering if I could run them down with you. All right. First of all, I don't know if you recall Soya texting you a couple of years back.
And that was you, as it turns out, huh?
That was me. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, I'm the owner of the tape nowadays.
That's so great. How much did that cost, if you don't mind me asking?
I want to tell you the backstory. So it was offered to me directly, but it was out of my budget at the time because the seller was looking for $800. So I frequent a Primus board, and I told other fans, I've been offered this, and I know the guy selling the tape. He could backtrack on his worth any day, and we'll never hear these songs. So we got to jump on this opportunity. So we set up a Kickstarter, and in a week, we got the $800. So This guy sent the tape to somebody in Canada where it was converted to digital. And then that guy sent the tape to me. And it's the biggest treasure of my Primus collection, definitely. You described the demo in the book, but that was all that we had at that point. I mean, we had never even seen a picture of this tape before. It's so incredibly rare.
I think the tape you're talking about is a different tape than the one I'm talking about. I think because when Soya called me, I was able to see that the tape that you got predated me.
Oh, you described this. You said, okay, I'm gonna quote it. Okay.
Yeah.
You said this was just a black and white cassette cover that Les designed that had a graphic image he had drawn, which was very similar to Suck on This.
True.
So I'm sure it's got to be this one.
Does it? And it probably has Tommy the Cat, right?
It has Tommy the Cat. It's got Sgt. Baker. It's got an early version of 11.
Okay.
And it's got Temporary Face.
That might be the same tape. I don't know why I was thinking about something that sounded different.
Right.
I'll tell you,
are you guys demos that came out back then?
Yeah.
That are scattered around, either got out into the peoples or did not,
Yeah, the famous first one was called Primate, which was got some notoriety because it got played on a famous radio station in the Bay Area that was called, I think, The Quake.
Yeah,
which predated me completely. There was a guy named Big.
I think that's the original Live 105, isn't it?
It was kind of like Live 105, but
I'm saying it's the same numbers. It was 105 was the Quake.
Oh, was it really?
I think so. And then
there was a really great radio DJ in the Bay Area named Big Rick Stewart, who's in the My Name Is Mud video the bath with Adam. Like, he's the big guy.
Yeah.
He passed away, but he was on a number of different radio stations. And I think he lived near Les and Curtis Gomez in Was that San Leandro or whatever?
The San Pablo apartment.
Yeah. But anyways, and then there was one in between Primate and the one that we're talking about, Primus Sucks, but it was before me. So I don't even know if I ever had a copy of it.
Okay.
But Matt Wallace was like a big deal, to produce Primus in that era. But I mean, there's only, so much polishing of the curve thing that you can do. But I will say this, that, KUSF was University of San Francisco's radio station. It was a premier college radio station on the West Coast, like Calex in Berkeley.
Yep.
I immediately started to volunteer at KUSF when I first got to Rubinson's office, thinking, because I was in college radio for 4 years at Duke when I was in college, and turned out that KUSF wasn't just students of University of San Francisco. It was a lot of people that were in the music scene,
drunken dudes like Ron Quintana had a show.
Yeah, totally. He had the metal show.
Changed the metal world for sure.
Yeah, and then Kathy Cohn, who booked the I-Beam, was a DJ there. And then my friend David Katz-Nelson, who wound up being an A&R guy at Warner Brothers for 10 years, was there as a high school student. He wound up signing like Flaming Lips and Mudhoney and just the Shane MacGowan from the Pogues and just incredible stuff.
Wow.
And a great guy. But anyway, so they put out, there was this guy named Germ.
Oh, Germ's Choice.
Germ's Choice. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you guys knew about the Germ's Choice compilation. Yeah. So he kind of had the demo show. I remember Calex had a cool demo show, local band show. But Germ was the guy in San Francisco, and he put out this vinyl. So many loose threads here. I apologize, but when Faith No More blew up, we were like blown away, and Kristen Yee was kind of going out with Patton, and she decided to share my office when I moved out of the bedroom over to Different Fur, and she was kind of like my junior partner, sort of, and she was managing Bungle. She was kind of going out with Patton, who quickly became one of the biggest rock stars in the world. So I don't really know how that worked out for her. But they seem to work it out. Then the Bungle album for Warner Brothers was recorded at Different Fur with John Zorn, producing. So they were around the office every day for a month making that record. So there's a lot of closeness with that crowd. I was going to say, when Les and I went to Studio D in Sausalito at Matt Wallace's invitation, to hear what they were finishing up on the real thing before it was done. You could just already hear that it was going to be one of the greatest albums ever. You didn't necessarily know that like the commercial forces in the universe would allow it to become so big. Right. But you heard the power of how good it was and what they had created. 100%. Yeah. It was right up our alley. And it's kind of weird that me and Les went, because it wasn't like me and Les went and hung out and did a bunch of stuff like that, just the two of us. I mean, there were definitely some bunch of things over the years, but that's what happened that day. And then I remember Faith No More went out on tour opening for Metallica. So it was like all guns were firing and we're just like backstage. There was this metal industry conference called Concrete. There's a company called Concrete Marketing. They had a conference in LA and everybody was staying at the same hotel. And I remember Chris Cornell's future wife was managing Soundgarden, and her name was Susan Silver. And they were in the next Silver, yes. Yeah, they were in the next room from us at that convention. And we somehow saw, Faith No More and Metallica play at Irvine or somewhere on that trip. But yeah, so I mean, dude, at that same point, Primus still had only Suck on This. Right. And the thing I want to say about Suck on This, so I mean, obviously, I worked with Les. I think I started booking Primus at the end of '86, which is pretty early on. And then, Travis kind of handed off the management to me sometime in early '87. So by the time, Jay joined in middle of '88, I'd had a good year and a half or more under my belt with Primus. And Jay was, a pretty good friend of mine. I remember before I even hooked up with Big City, there was a couple opportunities to work for the Freaky Executives. I think I did do a bunch of, I remember 2 shows I worked for as the assistant road manager for the Freaky Executives. Oh, wow. One was at De Anza College in Cupertino. And guess who comes skateboarding up on the campus during that outdoor college gig? Brain, who I had never met. And I didn't meet him that day, but I remember JC going, "Hey, there's the drummer from Big City." Rain comes rolling up on the skateboard. And then we did New George's in San Rafael. I worked for the Freak Executives. And then there was some studio stuff going on in, I believe, Richmond, California.
Yeah.
And I got to know those guys. So I knew Jay pretty well. So when he joined Primus, that was pretty fun. But, Les, obviously, cleared the decks when Todd decided he wanted to, become a dad and all that stuff. And I knew Lur basically from the Blind Illusion stuff. I remember a night where, so you might have to help me out with this. There was wasn't there like a punk rock band called like SNFU or something like that?
Yeah, totally from Vancouver. Yeah.
Now, are they the band that did a cover of Peace Train by Cat Stevens?
I can't.
There was a punk rock band that was at that level. They were playing like the Covered Wagon or somewhere in like 80.
That would have been SNFU or No Means No. No Means No would not have done that song.
Yeah. And I hadn't met Lur yet. And I told Les that I was going to see this show. I don't know why I was going to a punk rock show, but I was. And Les is like, well, Lur's going to be there. And you got to just go up and introduce yourself to him. And I don't think I found him that night, so we didn't actually meet. So obviously Suck on This was recorded immediately after the lineup of the band changed. Right. I mean, it was like for what would have been a huge setback for most bands became a launching point. I mean, granted, the Slingshot or whatever was pulled back by Jay Lane. I mean, you guys have talked about the
okay, so hold on. You jumped over the Sausage demo.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Dudes on the way the snowball's going down.
Yeah, let me just say this before I forget. I did meet Tim Alexander before Les did, and it had nothing to do with Primus. I was at Rubinson's office, and the band that Tim was in from Arizona called Major Lingo relocated to the Bay Area. Somehow they got a hold of me. A lot of times bands would call clubs and be like, how do I get a gig? And then they'd say, we'll get Dave to be your agent. And then you can get a gig here. Just because people like talking to me and I knew what I was talking about. Like, so if I said this was the right opening act for Fishbone or whoever, they could trust me, Right. So Tim and the leader of Major Lingo visited me at Rubinson's office and brought me like the Major Lingo demo, and it was just, one of a million stupid meetings I had at that stage of my career. But so anyway, I did know Tim, but feel free to ask any questions.
Oh yeah. I want to go back a little to the demos, David. First with Primus Sucks, the one with the baby on the cover that we were talking about. Do you have any recollection how many of those tapes were made and how they were distributed?
Not specifically. I mean, first of all, the reason why I brought up Germ's Choice and the KOSF stuff was because I believe it's the version of Tommy from the Suck on the Primus Sucks demo. You might know differently.
I believe it is.
My memory is that we just literally took that.
Yeah, it's that
from the demo.
Yes.
But I mean, in those days, obviously it was like, the Stone Age, like we were mailing tapes out to people and with a press kit. Like I'd use Rubinson's copy machine and
like radio stations and the like.
It probably didn't leave California, at that stage. Maybe I knew all the college stations in Northern California. Maybe I knew like anything that was remotely like underground press. I don't know if the band did anything with it that I didn't do. We didn't sell them anywhere except maybe at shows.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't recall,
there's no way to count, dude.
Yeah. I mean, it couldn't have been more than, a few hundred, if that.
Did you keep one?
I have at least one. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. In preparation for in preparation for the Suck on This album, David, you wrote a press kit where you mentioned all of the demos the band had recorded prior to that release, and they are the Primate demo, Sausage, Primus Sucks, Sucking Songs, and Welcome to This World.
Wait, say those names again.
Yeah, so the ones that you mentioned in the press kit are Primate.
Yeah.
Primus Sucks,
Okay.
Sausage,
Yeah.
Sucking Songs,
Yeah.
and Welcome to This World.
Wow. I don't remember those last two specifically.
Did you get to hear all those tapes when you made that press kit, or did you just know that they existed?
Chances are when Trouse handed over the reins to me for the management, I do remember the meeting that Les and I had at Rubinson's office. I had my desk. It was kind of in the attic. Rubinson was a savvy businessman. He owned a number of buildings around San Francisco, especially the Upper Haight, and rented them out and made a lot of money off of being a landlord. So this place that we had at the corner of at the corner of Masonic and whatever that street is at the edge of the Panhandle. Anyway, so the idea was that I was going to manage Primus, but like Les and I had been helping him by booking shows, but we didn't know each other that well. And I was super tight with Brain. I mean, I'd been on every big city show, and I got to know Mervyn House really well through Brain, even though they weren't in big city. They'd had the Limbo Maniacs, a version of Limbo Maniacs in high school before that. But anyway, so Les came over and we had this meeting, and it was super awkward, and there was like a wooden bench that was up there, some antique thing, and we were sitting there, and I can't remember if it was that meeting or maybe a later one where he just kind of brought me stuff. That was like a common thing, where a band would like sort of, here's everything we have, and I remember there was this guy, I don't know if Soya would know about this. There was some guy who had a funny name that he made up, and he made like videos of I guess it was like live videos of bands, and he kind of like manufacture like video compilations of like local bands or something. It was like,
that sounds familiar. I can't remember.
Yeah. That was like a goal of ours, like what are our goals, besides
it was before anybody in that sphere that we were all performing in, where there was any rights or copyrights or anything anybody did to help out your band. You're like, fuck yeah, do it.
Yeah.
It's like, cool.
And it's funny, man. I remember there was this woman like sitting across from me who sat across from me like every day at the other end of this attic, Kathy Horton, and she was the music publisher for Rubinson's, music publishing rights, which was kind of obviously something that every artist has to deal with. But back in the day, like you could just sign artist publishing away from them for like peanuts and like keep their money. It was terrible. Right. But anyway, so he probably gave me copies like. I have all my old demos and stuff in a box, so I could get back to you.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Everything.
So it's likely that you have all of these tapes in storage?
I mean, I don't recall seeing anything called Welcome to This World. And I don't recall, I don't have a visual on Sucking Songs either necessarily. So I don't know that I still have that or... Yeah, I mean,
Todd Huth told us that they distributed Primus Socks and Sausage, but they didn't do anything with the rest of the tapes. He said they were never released. So I'm wondering if maybe Les made these tapes and he showed them to you, but they never circulated anywhere.
Well, maybe Primate had something going on for it. It was way before my time because, like I say, Big Rick played it on the Quake. That was the story. But yeah, those other two, I don't know. But yeah, one of the things I did for many, many years for any band that I worked with was to send out as many copies of their demo tape as I had to record companies, and the notion that you could send a cassette tape and a press kit to a record company and get a deal out of it was not totally far-fetched because like if you had a local following, these A&R guys had budgets to fly to your town and check out your live show. And like maybe the live show was better than the tape, and then the guy could say, oh, the tape doesn't quite capture it. But like I could see from your live show, that you guys really have something going on. So like maybe I'll pay for some guy to make you a better demo. And like, we'll see if that, goes anywhere. And that would be something that I would do over and over and over again.
Okay, so hold on. Let's get back on track where we were. The Sausage demo was what the sidetrack was. When Matt Weiniger recorded that, it was a pinnacle of magic that happened. You know?
Yeah, it was like catching lightning in a bottle. I mean, you've said it. I heard you say it on the J-Ski episode. I mean, there's nothing I could say to add more than what you've already said about it. It was a game changer. Especially because I'd like been in the front lines of doing everything that there was to do for this band and more for a year and a half. And suddenly it had a funk drummer, I had no clue,
But dude, on top of that, suddenly everybody started turning their heads to go, whoa, what the fuck is this?
Exactly.
And that's where I was as a listener and a fan of any new music is what I was looking for. And dude, when that demo came out, it was like, holy fuck, man.
Let me tell you, man, I can remember shows that Primus did, any show Primus did when Curveball was in the band. But especially like their headline shows at Berkeley Square, which was kind of like, the closest thing to the hometown venue since they were East Bay,
Yep.
And there'd be nobody there, except for like the 5 friends, which was like Shannon Bell, Rock Hod,
Yeah.
Who's the guy that became Clem Donahue? And then Anka, remember Anka?
Yes, of course.
And like, so there was like a few of these people, and there was a certain kind of dancing that they did to that sloppy Curveball beat. And it was like this weird thing. And it was like, well, God, that's Primus, they had like 5 fans and they dance weird,
Dude, when I'm telling you, I saw that show with No Means No and Primus, and I was like, whatever. And Curveball had the ice bell for a right cymbal. It was just like this, and he's just like, Tom the Cat. Next time I saw them was they opened for the Chili Peppers when it was with Blackbird McKnight and DJ Peligro.
Yeah,
remember that at the Cathartic Cabaret?
Yeah, they did it at the Omni too. Same.
It was
same
weekend. Like, we're like, ooh, what the fuck?
Yeah,
there's a drummer that's ripping, and he's all catching cymbals and shit. It was like, fucking A, and now we're talking, dude.
Yeah. I mean, one of the cool things about that Chili Pepper weekend, which obviously was half the members of the Chili Peppers were black.
Yeah.
And never recorded an album with them.
Right.
Not that those two things are related, but it just was just a bizarre moment. And Flea's, I guess it was his first wife, or girlfriend at the time, was very pregnant and was about to give birth, and she was not there. But Flea had gotten a pager. This is 1988, so that's kind of early for a pager.
Yeah.
And Todd Huth had a pregnant wife, and he too had a pager. And so they were bonding over the fact that at any minute, either one of them could get the page that their wife was going into labor. That's my memory from that weekend,
They'd have to drop everything and go.
But one of the things that I think Tim also said about the Sausage demo was that not only did it get Primus a lot of attention, but it literally started to sell what we consider to be a lot, So maybe at first it was like 500 copies. I don't know if it was more than 500 copies in the end, but it seemed like it was a lot. It was selling out. Like however many we'd bring to the shows, they'd all sell.
They'd be gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it was monumental for the moment, and that really, for me, was the snowball got to where it was built and started rolling down the hill. Was that
and not only for Primus, but for that whole funk thrash
and the scene. I mean, really, a lot of bands all grabbed on as well.
Yeah,
these bands that had really built that snowball together.
When we started doing those shows at the Omni, that was really kind of the best. Part of the live piece of it, in the sense that it was the biggest venue where we could headline. We kind of needed, the co-headline with the bigger bill than that, even to get to that level. But then it started to sell out every time, and the line would be around the corner, and people would talk about, the hell line,
right on,
it became like a huge thing. But we'd start paying our rent that way by just doing that every 6 weeks. That was a thing. I forget which episode you guys talked about the fact that you couldn't play, in the same town. I think Jay was talking about like he'd have a show across town the same night.
And that's when the Limbos guys had like 18 different bands just so they could play every week or all week just to pay their rent.
right, with different bands. Yeah. And let me talk about that in 1 second too. But like what Jay was saying about how like the club owners didn't want you to play, too close together. Yeah, but that's because it was common sense. Like you couldn't sell enough tickets. I mean, maybe there were some exceptions. I think Jay said that they sold out both shows in one night or whatever.
Yeah.
But typically you couldn't do that. You couldn't do it in like at least 4 to 6 weeks. You needed to. Yeah, but that was the cool thing about the Bay Area is that you had all these kind of, smaller markets or whatever. So San Jose and Petaluma and Berkeley and San Francisco and, whatever, maybe Sacramento. There's a lot of places you could go. And we would obviously branch out farther than that. And I learned that from Big City. I mean, they played all the time. They never had a record out. Never.
Right.
Dude, the Limbos were the kings of like creating bands just to like pay the rent.
Oh my God. I mean, the thing about the Limbo Maniacs was that they were the best musicians, really. I mean,
totally. All of them are
they were all total masters of their instruments. Yet the vocal in their band was the bass player doing pretty run-of-the-mill white rap vocal. You know what I mean? It's like so like you take like the best musicians on the planet and have like Anthony Kiedis from the first 2 Chili Peppers records, just
on a Miles Davis band.
Yeah.
Which was Borgnine, right?
And frankly, like after they made their first record, which was so great, I thought it was sort of like they had unlimited options musically to the point where they couldn't figure out what to do.
Yeah.
They couldn't choose which direction to go in because they could literally do anything, which is kind of dumb, but whatever. That's what happened. But yeah, so the cover band thing was the best. I mean, eventually they all moved in together.
The Mission House, dude, was the best.
23rd and Mission.
Oh man, dude.
Oh man,
the puppet show is the best, dude.
And it was during the time when the San Francisco 49ers were the team of the decade, and they won multiple Super Bowls, and we'd always go to the Limbo House for the Super Bowl parties, and Murph would face his amplifier out the window into the mission and just play it like top volume. But we'd usually go back there after gigs. I kind of remember one night, I don't know if it was at the Stone or if like maybe Wolfgang's was still around, but like Curveball was in the band, was in Primus. And I remember like, Curve and his buddies got to the house before anybody else. And they were just like pissed off, like that nobody was there. And they just wanted to go in and start drinking. So they kicked down the back door of the house. And it was mayhem. And Merv would, Merv doesn't want me to talk about too crazy stuff, but he's an artist in many ways. And they would have these sort of like giant pieces of foam. I don't know if they were like from a mattress, but he would just take out a knife and just carve these beautiful sculptures out of foam.
What? Dude, you saw the puppet show at the Mission House, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Where those guys carve the dicks and they put them in the nose, and you go down the street and they would go down the street, go stand across the street. It's like, okay. And they'd pull the blind down, the white blind.
What was crazy was there was a comic.
Josh and Frankie, they had these huge foam carved out dicks and pantyhose, so they look killer. And you go down and stand across the street and they do the silhouette like 2 dicks, like and you would bend over and it'd be like in the silhouette, dude. From the street, you were like, we were laughing so hard. We were laying in the gutter and the puke and the piss and the gum. It was like
that was obviously part of the Limbo thing was like total sophomoric humor. I mean, their lyrics, butt funkin' and porno and all that kind of stuff. Yep. But the cover band thing, I don't remember which one was first. Probably Ted Zeppelin. Which was Nugent and Zeppelin.
We did many Victims Family gigs with Ted Zeppelin.
And there was one gig in San Jose, which is, they're from Cupertino, which is a San Jose suburb. Obviously where Apple is based. And there's a place called the Cactus Club. And one night, Jason Bonham was in town.
Oh, wow.
And somehow we got the word to Jason Bonham to come and sit in with Ted Zeppelin.
No way.
Yeah, a professional photographer came and took the photo of the band with Bonham, and it made it into Rolling Stone magazine. And this is at the time that the Limbo Maniacs album is out. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're like, Jason Bonham, Rolling Stone, sitting in with local Zeppelin cover band Ted Zeppelin. No mention of the Limbo Maniacs. Right. Nothing. It's just like, oh, what a lost opportunity. Yeah. But I actually had that picture framed over my desk for years. But so, Merv would always design shirts. And, the shirt thing was a big deal with Primus too. And Les and Larry, you probably heard stories of them printing shirts, and they shared a rehearsal studio with Faith No More.
That was the old Suck on This Club.
Yeah. And Mike Borden from Faith No More was a huge San Francisco Giants fan, and he got those guys to print up some special Giants t-shirts. Oh, wow. I forget if it had anything to do with Faith No More or anybody else, or if it was just simply a Giants shirt. But it was kind of a simple thing to do, I guess, for those guys. I mean, I wouldn't have known how to do it.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of event shirts, which are kind of a big deal. Yeah. These days, you have a shirt just for the show.
Yeah.
And I remember Primus did Valentine's Day at the Warfield. And there was that red shirt with the Skeeter holding a dripping heart, for Valentine's Day. It was just for that one night.
Great idea.
And lots of other, cool shirts for Primus. But the Limbo thing too, because they had all these different cover bands, every cover band had a shirt design. And I'm pretty sure Merv designed all. He was really talented. Sometimes the shirt idea preceded the formation of the band.
Oh,
so you'd have they'd come up with this idea for a shirt, and they're like, we got to do that band, based on the shirt.
Wow.
I remember we were going to Haight Street to see, I'm going to say Soundgarden at the I-Beam during the Louder Than Love moment or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're okay, we're park down on Stand In or wherever the fuck. And we walk by the bowling alley, get up to the night break, and there's the sandwich board out in front. Here's what's going on tonight. And it's all the Baritone Fags.
Oh yeah.
And me and my friends we were with were like, are you serious? And right as we looked at it, we're bewildered going, that's a band? And Mervis comes out the door and goes, Soya, what's up? He's dude, we're playing at the night break tonight. Come see us. I'm well, dude, we're going to see Soundgarden, dude. What? He's man, we're trying to make rent, dude. Come see us. We're the Baritone Fags tonight. I was
that's so funny. If you had asked me, I might have said that the Baritone Fags might have been a band that never made it past the t-shirt phase, because there were numerous bands where they would make the shirt and never actually get around to do the band.
They make a shirt and never do this.
Can I ask you?
There was definitely one that never even got the shirt, which was the Dung Beatles.
Dung Beatles, that's a good one. Can I ask you about a specific cover band? Because it's the name just jumps out to me on this list is Smiley and the Gay Boys.
Yeah,
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so. That was when it really got to the point where they had 10 cover bands. There was the one with Kehoe called Johnny Moon and the Lunatics, which he gave me a CD of a few years ago, which is amazing. It was a jump swing, Louis Jordan, Cab Calloway,
Louis Prima, and all that stuff. Yeah,
Louis Prima. Yeah, Joe Jackson has an album called Joe Jackson's Jump and Jive, which is a lot of that.
Yep, me and Kehoe do that. One of those songs.
Oh, really?
Five Guys Named Mo. We do that.
Five Guys Named Mo. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Watch out.
There was one called Freddie Fatstone and his Joe Fatsos. And I forget, there was this really heavy jazz sax player in Johnny Moon named Vince the Prince Wallace, who was a friend of Kehoe's mom. Vince the Prince and his Horn of Plenty. Wow. That was Kehoe's thing. But anyway, there were so many. The Borgnine was the Miles cover band of the
Miles Davis one, yep. And then there was Kaka, of course.
Yeah, Kenny Brooks from Rat Dog was in that band. He was also in Smoking.
Charlie Hunter as well.
Yeah.
Kenny Brooks played with Charlie Hunter a bunch.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Alphabet Soup, yeah.
And Alphabet Soup.
Alphabet Soup, yeah. He was in Smoking section, that well hung horn section. But yeah, there were so many of these. I want to say quickly too that one of the bands that never made it past the T-shirt phase was the one they were going to do. So it was usually like there was a different singer, because it was always the Limbo Maniacs.
Yeah.
And then whatever singer, could do Zeppelin or could do Johnny Moon or, and so the idea was they were going to do one with Mike Patton. It was going to be called K-Tel, which was the name of a record company.
They made T-shirts for that.
So yeah, that was the thing. They made the T-shirts and they never did the band. And it was
Did Les print those shirts? I remember those shirts going around. Everyone had K-Tel shirts on with that cool psychedelic.
Yeah, it was like a Paisley K-Tel logo. So K-Tel was this record company that did compilation albums of the biggest hits of the day. There's tons of them in the 70s. And it was going to be some weird selection of songs from K-Tel albums, and Patton was going to sing it, and they never did it. But Patton wears the K-Tel shirt in one of like the 2 or 3 biggest Faith No More videos of all time.
Of course.
So when to me, like, it was the great thing. And I was booking all these bands. So I would make, $20 or whatever it was, off these shows. And they were working all the time. And it was just super fun. And I loved going. And my friends all loved going. And then it kind of jumped the shark when they did the band Curveball.
Right.
So Curveball really kind of harnessed that, animal by saying, well, hey, I'm going to do one. And it's going to be like a funk cover band. Like nobody had thought of that before, like an actual funk cover band for the horn section. And he got the best players. And like, it wasn't like he could really necessarily sing that great, but it was this awesome band,
It was kind of cheesy, dude.
Yeah, it was kind of cheesy, but they would play like
everybody went because, here's another one. And I was like, it was,
and I don't know
with the Jesus belt. At the night break, and it was like,
were Merv and House ever in Curveball? I mean, they must have been, right?
I know. I saw them with Brain one time.
Brain was definitely in it, and Kehoe was eventually a big part of it. But I don't know if he was in it from the beginning.
Curveball singing was like tepid, it wasn't.
Yeah, but I mean, they played My Roommate's Wedding, which was in like '94. They had kind of a life of their own because it was such mainstream music, so for me, get to like 91 and, wherever Primus was at that point, probably like not quite signed with Interscope yet, but doing good on Caroline. I forget.
That's why it came out. Yeah.
We're talking the beginning of 91. And I somehow convinced these guys to let me do a band. And like, I hadn't been in a band, since college, and I never really played in front of audiences per se, but I just sort of had an idea of like what my dream cover band would be. And it was totally different than that. And it wasn't like kitschy or like a weird angle, there was no shirt, it was just like what I would want to do if I could do a cover band, which was kind of like, Little Feat and the Meters. So it was kind of like New Orleans funk, but maybe the white side of that, which would be Little Feat, maybe branching out into like Allman Brothers and Southern Rock on one end, and maybe getting kind of deeper into the New Orleans thing. But like Robert Palmer did a bunch of records where he covered, the Meters and Little Feat and a lot of Alan Toussaint stuff. So it was a lot of that. Joe Cocker did a record where he covered.
You guys did a band. Wow. Gay Dave and
Smiley and the Gay Boys.
You did shows.
We did 3 shows.
Wow.
And you played guitar and sang, or just played guitar?
I played rhythm guitar and was the lead singer. It was totally like my idea.
That's awesome, though. You got.
Okay, hold on. Frankie wants to know this for sure. Who was in the band?
So it was Brain, Merv, House, Pete Scaturo, and Adrian Isabel on percussion.
Because he was in Turd Boy too.
Was he?
He was the dude that played the percussion in Turd Boy. Those couple Turd Boy shows we did.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Turd Boy before.
Yeah. I feel
like if anything, I could say that my shit was way better than Turd Boy. That's about all I could say. That's about all I could say.
Amazing. Frankie has been hounding me about this Gay Dave and the whatever that band.
No, Smiley and the Gay Boys.
Smiley and the Gay Boys. He hounded me. He goes, dude, come on, you got to know. I'm like, I don't know about this. We got to get Dave on here. That's what's telling me to call you.
I have to say, for the record, that I definitely did not come up with that name. As a matter of fact, I was so grateful that these guys would even let me do something with them.
Was it good?
I was like, pick the name, whatever name you guys want to go with.
But was it good?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, there was a friend of house's named Adam Blinn who used to record like every show at the Night Break.
Right.
And he recorded our show at the Night Break. And Night Break did this thing called Sushi Sunday.
Oh, I know that one big time.
Yeah. So every Sunday afternoon, they had a sushi bar on Haight Street, and it was free. And, whatever. It's just normally like a bunch of local bands. I saw Jane's Addiction do it one time.
Nice.
As they were blowing up, and other cool bands.
You guys, Josh, Frankie, the Night Break holds like 80 people.
No, I mean, we could squeeze like 225 in there, but like you couldn't move. It was super, super uncomfortable. Like you couldn't get to the bar. When Primus got big, in like 90-ish, we would do like multiple nights there, and it was crazy,
Yeah. So go on with Smiley and the Gateway.
Yeah. So the first gig
at Sushi Sunday, we're in.
There was some club called the Boathouse out by the lake in San Francisco that was down by like Stonestown area. I don't know if you know what that is. Kind of
down 19th, right?
Yeah, down that way towards the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And we opened for Ted Zeppelin one night, so it was easy. It was the same guys, same gear, and there's actually a full video of that whole show.
Frankie, do you have that?
No, I've never seen that.
Nobody has it except for me.
David, you've got that in a safety
deposit
box.
Don't give Frankie your email, Dave. He's going to be emailing you every day.
There's like one thing where I totally fuck up, but like other than that, it's like I know we pulled it off. We did what I intended to do. You
couldn't have a better backing band, right?
What's that?
You couldn't have a better backing band.
Oh my God! It was a dream come true.
Right. The best guys on the planet, dude.
Yeah.
Here I was, January 91, I guess I would have been 26, and having never done a band. It was just a dream, kind of a scenario. It was never going to go anywhere. I was grateful to get the 3 gigs out of it. The Sushi Sunday followed a Saturday night gig by Ted Zeppelin at the Night Break. So they were able to leave the gear set up overnight. And then we showed up the next afternoon and did it.
You didn't have to like tear down your microphone and the cord and put it in.
Well, no, the Ted Zeppelin gear from the night before,
Right.
And then the 3rd gig was just a private party that my roommate did for his law school class. And Scaturo gave up by then. So we didn't even have keyboards. And that was the only one where we got paid like decently because it was my roommate.
He gave up by then after 2 years. That's amazing. I can't wait to text him tomorrow about that. That's awesome.
Yeah. But I can't tell you how often I think about like what songs I would do if I could do it again. You know what I mean? Like it was such a fantasy.
Amazing stuff, man.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's phenomenal. It just hearing you guys talk about this stuff is great for me because we have there's some text out there. There's this family tree on this old website, but we're talking to the guys that were around for it.
I know what you're talking about, and that was like one of the earliest
Ram site,
the earliest online history of Primus, and that guy spoke to House one day by phone,
right?
And that's where a lot of that information came from, was that conversation.
A lot of it is in first person,
it
says Brain and I left to tour at the Limbos. It was like, it's got to be House.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I want to say about Suck on This. To me, this is a pivotal thing in Primus. And one of the things that's hard as a manager in retrospect, especially all these many years later, is, you want credit, but you don't want to take credit. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of a funny thing.
Well, it's strange because they're on stage and you're not, right? But you're helping them out. You're working
and typically, whatever credit you're due, you're probably not getting as much of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I might be too close to it to really have a good view of it. But the bottom line was Sunk on This. I was working out of my bedroom. Les's dad, loaned Les the money to record it, press it up. Very first 1,000 vinyl copies that we did. I think ultimately there were probably 4,000 copies of Suck on This on the original Prawn Song label prior to Caroline, because my memory is that we did 1,000 cassettes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so first we did 1,000 vinyl, but a huge fraction of that was stuff that I used for kind of, marketing and band promotion.
Yeah.
And then we were able to get, the distribution through Rough Trade, which is a well-known British distributor, had record stores, which is an odd combination, really, if you think about it. But they had one on Haight Street eventually. I think maybe at the time, the Rough Trade record store was in a different part of San Francisco. They would do consignment, where you could bring them records and they would sell them for you and give you a percentage.
Wow.
And they were selling, obviously, on the success and the momentum of the Sausage demo. Right. This was a great, cover. I mean, I think the cover helped, you know?
Yeah, it's really right.
So they were able to give us distribution around the country. And that was timed with all this marketing stuff that I was doing. So I'm sure this is probably typical, but, we bought hundreds of these cardboard vinyl album mailers where you'd have to fold everything in, you put the vinyl in whatever paper and, you tape it the right way, put a mailing label on it.
Yeah.
The big one, I'll never forget, my buddy from college was staying with me at the time. And we lived in this Del Mar apartment right off Haight Street. Publication called the CMJ Report, which was the trade publication for college radio. Having been in college radio when I was in college, I was very familiar with it. It had reviews of all the new records that week. I think it was a weekly publication.
Oh, wow.
And at the back, and it was just like, really long pages, and they were just stapled together, but there was some of them were glossy. But at the back were the playlist of every college radio station in America. Unless they flaked that week and didn't send it
in type that you could barely read, because there's a lot of them,
super tiny.
Yeah.
And I literally went through, and I was reading this every week, even in Rubinson's office and stuff. I went through and I would circle every college radio station that I thought might play Suck on This, just by opening the box, looking at the cover and going, what's this? Putting it on and going, oh, wow. And so let's say there were 500 college stations in America. And I probably picked out 100 or 120, maybe. And we mailed them out along with, a more national version of what I was doing with the demos to Underground Press and bigger independent labels that I thought might want to sign the band and, whatever. And it just so happened, and that CMJ had a national conference that I went to every fall, one of two national industry conferences I went to every year. And this was more of like the underground music conference. And I decided to befriend this guy who was one of the main editors for the CMJ Report, Dave Margulies, who, by the way, I think lives in Ashland today.
Oh,
and super great guy. Tulane grad. So we had a lot of shared stuff over the years with New Orleans music, because I wound up managing Galactic from New Orleans. And so I befriend him, and he moves to San Francisco for whatever reason. He was doing like a panel discussion of some kind at this place called the Paradise Lounge, which became kind of a cool little club. Like 3 stages, right?
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Upstairs, downstairs, lounge room.
Yeah.
Rock room. Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell a lot of stories about that. But so I go to this, we had just pressed Suck on This. He's doing the panel, just moved to town. I'm like, hey man, I know who you are. I've been to all the conferences. I'm managing this band. They do pretty well. Please check this out. Well, he put the Suck on This cover on the front cover of CMJ Report.
Wow.
Because they had like this kind of like thing on the cover. Like they'd have like the hot 4 releases, and then they'd be like the one you never heard of, like, or whatever it would be. Like, I forget, the underground, like here's a band that's just, you really should check out that nobody knows. And he gave us that.
Wow.
And it just happened to be timed with me mailing this thing out to like 110 stations. And next thing you know, we're charting in like the top 100 albums on college radio. Like that's actual airplay,
Wow.
So then, I get a booking agency to get the band shows, across the country and back, once, which was not an agency that we stayed with or even existed for that long, but they actually had Nirvana, at that time, in 89, they were called Bulging Eye.
My God. Dave.
Yeah.
They booked Victim's Family.
See?
Shows with Nirvana.
See?
Through Bulging Eye.
Wow.
I'm telling you. And
Dave Grohl was in the band on the Bleach tour. We did shows with Bulging Eye.
We opened for Soundgarden in New York I think it was during the CMJ convention.
Yeah. Scotty Halter was part of it when we were there.
Gee whiz.
I think it was Soundgarden, White Zombie, Primus, and like a couple other bands at like NYU or something, during CMJ in '89. But their offices were at what is now the Independent. It had been the Kennel Club. I guess it must have been the Kennel Club already by then.
Yeah, would have been. That's where I met Michelle from Bulging Eye. Was at the
Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think they had Flaming Lips too. Scotty.
Scotty. And they had Super Suckers was their big band at the moment.
Wow. I just want to say, going back to the Suck on This, marketing thing, I remember, so there was a post office on right off Haight Street. I think it was Clayton and Haight. And me and my old college buddy, we had a giant box and we put all 120 of these boxed up Suck on This records in this box and put it on this stupid old skateboard that I had and wheeled the box down the street around the corner to Haight Street and then down Haight Street, like a giant box on a skateboard. And that was how we got all those boxes to the post office.
Oh man, I love how janky that is, but it just seems to track with a lot of what that band was doing at that time.
Yeah.
Kind of makes sense.
And so, so let's say we sold 3,000 or 3,500 copies of this record, doing this tour, getting the college radio airplay, maybe a couple of weekly independent print publications in the towns where we played would write a preview or a review or whatever. And, the ball was rolling. And so we're at the CMJ conference, and all these conferences will have a room where every label and instrument company and everybody else has a little booth, and we were trying to get a deal with an independent label, and different than all the other bands that I worked with at that time, and really different than almost any other band that I ever worked with. Les did not want to sign with a major label at that phase, and I probably said this enough to where you guys have heard me say it before, but it was really Les's direction and idea that we were going to sign with an independent label,
right?
And we were going to try to do as short term of a deal, as we could, because it was proven at that point that for an underground band that wasn't playing commercial music per se of the times, you needed to be on an independent label to sort of build that hardcore underground fan base that hypothetically would be with you for life. I just said this on the Toby Wright thing, but U2 and REM were two of the biggest bands of the decade, and that's how they started. I mean, maybe U2 was always on Island, but they were always on college radio, and they were an underground band. REM was on an independent label for their first 5 albums, and then they went to a major label. But we were going to do it as short term as possible, So my thing was, I'd been to these conventions every year since '87, and I would go to these panels and I would hear the owners of some of the coolest independent labels in the country complaining about the fact that they couldn't get paid from their distributors. They had shipped thousands of records, and hypothetically sold thousands of records, but the distributor wouldn't pay the labels that they were distributing the money that they'd earned. So then how do you press more product if you can't even get paid for what you've already sold? So it became clear to me that, there were, only, let's say, 5 really good independent distributors, and each one of them had their own label. So the way to go was to be on the label that was owned by the distributor, because then there was no issue of
no back and forth. It's going to get out there.
Yeah. So, not only did we do this with Primus and Caroline, which is one of the 2 or 3 biggest independent distributors, but the same thing with Limbo Maniacs. Relativity was the other biggest independent distributor, and they were the in-house label for it. So, you guys have obviously read the book, and I'm sure it's in there.
David, now that you mentioned Caroline, do you have any recollection of the color variants for Suck on This and Frizzle Fry that were distributed in Europe by Caroline?
I heard you guys talk about this on one of the episodes, and I don't. As a matter of fact, there was something where you guys talked about like some weird cassette or something. Like I can't remember. It's like a European cassette or something like that. I forget.
That's a Frankie thing. I don't know that.
Yeah,
I don't know either.
Here's an interesting thing that I want to put out there to the world, which is that one of my sort of favorite responsibilities was like the proofreader of the album credits and lyric sheets and stuff like that. And I find myself every day of my life, like if I get an email from like a newspaper or magazine or whatever, and I see like just a stupid like letter missing from a word, I'm like, what's wrong with you guys?
It's a total turn off.
I'm the same. I am the same.
So I would do that. And then I remember when Les turned in the lyrics, isn't it Frizzle Fry that has the song Savington Willoughby?
Yep.
Yeah. So he had spelled Willoughby Willobby. Right. Now it's his character. He can spell it however the fuck he wants, Yeah. Who am I to say anything? But there's a street in LA called Willoughby, and it's Willoughby, right? And so I'm pretty sure that's how it's spelled. But anyway, I was like, dude, that's not how you spell the name Willoughby. I mean, maybe your guy has his own spelling, but like if you want to be like Willoughby, you need that, UGH.
Oh, UGH.
Yeah. So we changed it, but then somewhere along the lines, we missed one of them. I forget where it was. And then it probably got changed on the second pressing and we fixed it. Mm-hmm. But somewhere on something with Frizzle Fry, there's the typo.
I can't wait to look at my OG Frizzle Fry album.
It might have been the back cover, we got it right, but on the lyrics we missed it, vice versa.
Yeah, there's an inconsistency there.
That's a
I
funny
can't remember
one.
where it is. It's on my 94 Caroline repress as well. I think that inconsistency.
The mistake is in there, Josh?
That's so
I think
funny.
so, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously we gave Caroline Suck on This as a reissue. I mean, granted, it was only like a year after we put it out ourselves. So there was a minute there where there wasn't like a product flow of Suck on This. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because we stopped making it ourselves. We put out Frizzle Fry and we let them focus on that.
Yeah.
And, as we learned the hard way, really ourselves, Les and I with Prawn Song, you can't spend money to promote a band if you don't have the rights to their future records. It just doesn't make any sense, Yeah. So at least Caroline had, the second thing of the Suck on This reissue to, continue to make money from, to put towards just promoting the band in general.
Right.
And I've said this before, but I'll just say it again since we're talking about all the details. But, we did get to the point with Frizzle Fry where, we're just going and we're touring all the time. And I think it was specifically that we got offered the entire Jane's Addiction tour of Europe. I mean, in 1990, Jane's Addiction was what the band everybody wanted to be at that moment, right? They were the band, right?
Not just musically, but the role model of like a band in the public,
Yeah.
Like what everybody heard.
Started on a independent label, and I'd been, I was reading like Music Connection magazine from LA, which was, where they were from. They were part of that whole Scream thing, which was a weekly club, and it turned into the club with no name. And there was that funny story where I kidnapped Curveball, and when Primus was playing there, because we heard Rick Rubin was going to come down, and I didn't want, and we almost missed the gig because I was so stupid. I was driving Curveball in that van. This woman Dale Gloria, who was a crazy person, but built that whole scene, that Jane's was from, and really helped us by getting us that gig. Anyway, So, it'd been years of me sending demo tapes to the Jane's Addiction managers who own the Triple X Records label that their first record was on.
Right.
And then now we have a real record out, and they offer us the entire European tour. And
you're on Caroline at this
we're on Caroline. But it turns out that Caroline is kind of owned by Virgin. And in Europe, there is no Caroline. So you have to go through Virgin, which is really more of like a major label distribution thing. So, but they were out of money, and as an opening act at that level, you're not getting paid enough by, the headliner to be the opening act to cover the cost of doing that type of tour, especially going overseas.
Yeah. Right.
With the flights and the hotels, and there's all kinds of paperwork that needs to be done in between, borders every time you go to a new country with your gear and stuff like that. So I came up with the idea because the major labels had started to sort of sniff around. We basically knew that Les's plan was going to work, that we were going to sign with a major label after that. And so I proposed to the head of Caroline, this guy, Keith Wood, who's British, why don't we start a new budget, and everything that you guys spend from this point forward, you'll get reimbursed by the major label that signed us. That'll be a prerequisite of whatever major label.
Keep the ball rolling.
And that's what they went for it. And it wasn't a ton of money. And so we had done the John the Fisherman video, which I'm in. But sadly, the video that came out of that second budget was that horrible Puppies video.
Oh, okay. They
I never saw
at that
it.
time. Yeah, it's something, Soya.
It's horrible. The band had nothing to do with it. There's this guy named Kevin Kerslake, and I don't know if he was from Seattle, but he worked with a lot of the Seattle bands. He may have done like the official Soundgarden live home video for that Louder Than Love thing or whatever. He kind of had a reputation, but he was friends with Janet Billig, who was kind of our main kind of product manager at Caroline. She went on to be a really successful manager and Broadway producer and a lot of cool things. But yeah, they just did that video, and I don't even know if everybody in the band ever even saw that video.
Wow. Yeah.
I've never seen it.
It's weird avant performance art, essentially.
Yeah.
It's
like a guy who's like getting his head shaved, it's like as if he's joining the military.
Right.
Exactly.
Too many puppies are being shot in the dark. I don't know.
No, you're right on. It vaguely matches it.
But we did get to go to England. The amount of money that we maxed out this new budget, they still said, look, we know we're going to get paid back, but we can only spend, $30,000 or whatever it was. And we couldn't afford to do all of Europe with Jane's Addiction, but there was a 2-week UK portion. It was very extensive all over the UK. And that's what we did.
Okay.
And that was cool.
You really got to get your feet wet on the other side there and get something going there too. Because
I don't think they had really done much in Europe. I remember the Limbo Maniacs were kind of bigger for a minute in like Holland and some places, and they may have opened for a short Limbo run in like Holland and Belgium and stuff like that, which was super fun. The two things I remember about Jane's Addiction was because I went on like half of that. One is that we were in like Nottingham or somewhere. There was this castle, and we took a taxi way out in the countryside to go sightseeing. And it was me, Les, Larry, and the bass player of Jane's Addiction. And I had the camcorder, which is, the old video camera, because we were kind of starting to just collect footage, for home video. And I think it's in that cheesy home video. I don't know if you can...
Eric Avery would be the guy.
Eric Avery. Thank you. Yeah. So that was kind of a fun day. He obviously didn't last in that band. in that. But then the other thing was I think it was the big finale of the whole tour was in London. Yeah. And they invited Tim on stage to jam for Jane Says. He played a plastic cooler.
Oh, wow.
Just beating on that. And Ted Gardner, who is this Australian guy who,
Lord,
I remember standing on the side of the stage with Trows, who was obviously tour managing Primus, Ted Gardner and me, and I was secretly filming the Herb Jam on Jane Says, which I wasn't supposed to do. It was Jane's set,
Yeah.
And but
illegal to film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ted's like standing right next to me, and I've got the thing like this. I'm so down.
Where's those tapes? Where the hell are they?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably not in Cheesy Home Video. That's the only place it would have been.
Yeah, I
anyway,
remember that
awesome,
one. Yeah,
man.
that'd be a cool one to see. Well, David, let me. I think this would be a good spot for us to pause because we kind of covered the '80s portion of things.
Yeah, cool.
It'd be really cool to talk to you again and walk it through the '90s.
Yeah, it would be amazing to have you on again, David. You have so much to share.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I'm happy to do it. I mean, I'm actually surprised at the fact that I haven't forgotten, so much. Like there hasn't been a moment so far where I've been like, I can't remember what happened. Like I kind of remember all.
It comes out, man, when you get around a couple old guards hanging out.
Well, it's great having you, Sawyer, because you obviously are like, the perfect complement in terms of the experiences. You know what I mean? Like,
I was there, man. I lived all that shit.
It's, yeah. I was in the office a lot, and I would get a lot of shit from Les. It was kind of like I couldn't really win in a way. Like, if I came on the road, I got shit. If I didn't come on the road, I got shit. You know what I mean?
I had the same thing, dude. I'm on the road. I got shit. I'm at home. So, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Where are you? It's like, I'm not answering my pager. It says 777-1715. I'm not answering it. Fuck all day. Pager.
Yeah.